Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Let's move on to our first panel session today, featuring three wonderful presenters joining us from across multiple time zones in Singapore, Canada, and the UK. This panel highlights the global reach and transnational relevance of influencer cultures, exploring how gender politics and activism intersect with everyday digital practices. We're particularly grateful to Cindy, Anabelle, and Natty for generously making themselves available despite the challenging differences in local times. To our attendees, please feel free to submit your questions in the Zoom Q&A box throughout the session. Now, let's warmly welcome our first presenter, Cindy. The screen is yours.
Hi everyone, I'm Cindy, and it's a great honor and of course some anxiety to be the first presenter today. I'll be presenting our paper titled Labels That Shape How Body Positive Content Creators Singapore Navigate Activism and Feminism. This is co-authored with Dr. Shubha Abahani, and this is a section from a larger study on body positivity in Singapore. So I'm really mindful of the time that I have, so I'll just dive right in. So trigger warning, we will be touching on topics that include body anxiety, weight, and body discussions. So here I'm going to show you three screenshots, examples of the kind of body positive content that you've probably seen online. So this is the version of body positivity that's most familiar to many of us. So you can think of empowering captions, celebratory photos, and affirmations about self-love, and they do important work. They make people feel seen, validated, and supported. But as we will discuss today, there's a lot more going on beneath the surface, and behind these images is a careful negotiation of what can be said, how it is framed, and how much resistance can be shown, especially in a context like Singapore, where social political conditions are more constrained. But beyond what we see on the surface, it is also important to understand how scholars have defined body positivity. Academically, it's been described as a set of discursive practices that are performed within and through primarily digital spaces, traveling across national borders in interconnected ways. So in other words, body positivity isn't just about what is being said, but also how, where, and through whom it's being expressed. And that's exactly what we see in a Singaporean context, where global ideas and body acceptance are reinterpreted through local norms and expectations. And as positive and empowering as body positivity may sound, we also need to recognize its risk, because to reveal the body, especially a marginalized body, is to make it vulnerable. And as scholar Provident puts it, the revealed body is vulnerable. It is open to the risk of negative scrutiny, judgment, and attack. So here in the next two slides, we can see how vulnerable the revealed body can be. So on a Singapore-based forum, some netizens were quick to tear these people down using cruel and harmful words. So these words are meant to shame her for her looks, her size, and that post wasn't the only one. There were many other insults, mocking these women just for showing up and for sharing their stories. And this is the risk that comes with body positivity. Being seen also means being judged. So I also want to pause here and show you this screen grab. It's from a Straits Times, our national daily article featuring local body positive influences. And as you can see, with this visibility comes resistance. This Facebook post, for instance, is full of backlash. The comments are really harsh. Some accuse the movement of promoting obesity. And one even said, it takes less effort to be fat than to be thin. And it's not just one person. So if you look at the reactions over here, there were a lot of laughing faces, likes. So people actually agree. And I don't really have time to unpack all of this, but anti-fat rhetoric is, alive and well in Singapore. Health here is often framed as a personal responsibility, and a fat body is often read as moral failure. It's read as lazy, undisciplined, and excessive. And we can be real over here. This bias isn't subtle. It shows up in national health campaigns that normalize this bias. So when I talk about body positivity in Singapore, I don't see it just as feel-good posts or catchy hashtags. I see it as resistance. I see it as activism. And there is something here worth fighting for. But at the heart of my work is this belief that fat is feminist because as women, we face real consequences because of weight bias. So it affects how doctors treat us, how we live, and even our opportunities in life. So that's why scholars like Ficken and Rothblum do argue that we as feminist researchers must pay attention to the lived experiences of fat women. We need to give them a voice. So kind of in the past few slides, I have laid out how body positivity can be seen. So as mentioned, as reiterated again, it's not just feel-good content, but as activism and as feminist resistance. I also want to take a moment to talk about the labels and why they matter in this work here. First, we'll talk about the word fat. I choose to use this word deliberately. Calling someone fat is often seen as an insult, but in fat studies, using the word fat challenges the idea that fatness is a disease. So terms like overweight and obese carry medical baggage, and as scholar Cooper points out, rejecting these terms helps us to shift the focus. So instead of blaming individual bodies, we now critique the systems that make these bodies feel like a problem. So that's why throughout my work and this presentation over here, I do avoid using the words overweight and obese. Instead, I use the word fat because it is political and it is powerful. The other set of labels that I want to unpack over here is content creator and influencer. So in my study, I use both terms and for different emphasis. So drawing on chemists and his colleague and their colleagues 2017, content creators are focused on originality and storytelling. And this fits very well with body positivity because my participants were not just selling products. They were sharing personal narratives, building community, and creating meaning. And that's why I mostly use the words content creator to describe them. But here is also where reflexivity comes in, because many of my participants themselves reject the term influencer. They find it too commercial and they told me that it's too fake and it's not reflective of their values. And I respect that. But that said, I do still use the word influencer at times because it captures something important. Influencers do reflect a new kind of celebrity, one that's more accessible, one that's more everyday. And as Aberdeen explains, they use self-branding and aspirational storytelling to create deep emotional ties with their followers. And honestly, I would say that that's exactly what I saw in my participants. Their profiles, their stories, they are not just casual posts, they are intentional and they are strategic. So when I use influencer, I am talking and referring to the cultural power that they have, the ability to shape norms, values, and visibility within the body positive movement. So for this study, I conducted 7 semi-structured narrative interviews with influencers and content creators based here in Singapore. All of them have been active on Instagram for at least 6 months, constantly engaging with the body positive hashtag or hashtag BoPo. I wasn't interested in seeing how popular they were, so there wasn't any sort of follower count threshold. But what mattered to me more was the sustained and meaningful engagement with the hashtag itself. And all of my participants here identified as female or presented themselves as female in their contents. So I also want to take this space to speak briefly about feminist accountability, which is the idea that researchers should openly position themselves within their work. So in fat study, this means more than just naming a perspective. It also means reflecting on your own body size and how it shapes the research process. So unfortunately, as Lloyd and Hopkins point out, a lot of researchers still rarely talk about their body size in reflexive writing. And I would say that this kind of accountability matters because it keeps us honest. It reminds us that we are not neutral observers, but part of the dynamics that we are studying. And as a researcher here, I do choose to embrace this accountability. I have reflected on my own thin body and its presence in this research space. But it wasn't always very easy. It came about with quite a bit of tension. So for example, very early on, I kind of realized that my body became a very visible point of difference, especially in how my participants might perceive me. So they didn't really call out on my thin privilege directly, but they also asked why I was interested in this topic and hinted at whether I really understood their struggles. And these moments, I would say, really stayed with me. They shaped the way I engaged, the way I listened to them, and the way I interpreted their stories. And it also reminded me that my body was never neutral. It was part of the research as well. So I asked all of my participants 2 key questions, and the first is, how would you describe yourself as an activist? And honestly, I wouldn't say that the answers did surprise me, because especially in Singapore's context, where taking a strong stance can come with consequences. In summary, most of these participants rejected the label activist. Only one participant embraced it, and this was because she already called herself a body activist on her Instagram bio. But even then, she felt the need to defend her choice. She said that it wasn't really about calling out norms, but about her own deeply personal commitment to the cause. So I would argue that this reflects something deeper, or what scholars like to call depoliticization. So after all, in Singapore, activism is often viewed with suspicion. It is a very heavy word, and activism can feel stigmatizing, burdensome, and even dangerous. So I would say that their responses here show us that body positivity in Singapore isn't just shaped by individual beliefs, but by the wider political climate. And as we can see from these 2 quotes over here, there is very careful, deliberate language used by the participants to describe their stances. There is, we can see here, a very clear effort to distance themselves from overt activism. Instead, advocacy in its diplomatic, non-confrontational forms is seen as lower risk and a lot more acceptable, and this was what some of my participants aligned themselves with. So as you can see from this slide over here, participants were very aware of this dynamics. They knew that activism, or aligning themselves with activism, could even alienate their followers and bring about unwanted scrutiny. So their hesitation, I would say, isn't about lacking conviction. I would argue that it is about navigating a landscape where the wrong label can carry consequences. So my second question to participants were, do you identify yourself as a feminist? So this question was a bit more, it kind of sparked a bit more enthusiasm than the one about activism, but there was still some hesitation. So only one participant fully embraced the term. She proudly called herself a women's woman, someone who is always looking out for other women and making sure they feel comfortable. But several others said that they agreed with feminist values, but didn't want to adopt the label. For them, the word feminist still carried stereotypes of, that feminists are anti-men or overly aggressive, and a few outright rejected the label altogether. So we can see that even though they might practice feminist principles in their work, many choose not to name it as such. So why were there so many of these women hesitant to identify as feminists, even though they clearly supported feminist values? The answer lies not just in personal choice, but in structural conditions, the very context in which their identities and content are formed. And in Singapore, I would say that this hesitation does make sense. We are a society deeply coded by heteronormative ideals, and within this system, men continue to occupy positions of dominance, and women are just expected to support this patriarchy and hierarchy. So when a woman says that she is a feminist, it's not just a label. It is a statement, and it is a challenge. And this can be interpreted as threatening or disruptive. And I would say that it's not just about local dynamics. Feminism is often seen as a Western idea, one that doesn't always fit with what is considered traditional in non-Western societies. And this perception creates tension. Feminism feels foreign and even invasive. It kind of disregards the cultural nuances that matter over here. And if you add to the idea that be feminist as a killjoy, as Sarah Ahmed puts it, for the woman who dares to say the uncomfortable thing, the one who critiques what others celebrate and the one who spoils the mood to speak the truth. And that was exactly what some of my participants were trying to avoid. And let's not forget, these were not just ordinary women, they are also influencers, public figures. They are constantly watched, constantly judged, and for them, stepping into politicized identity like feminist doesn't just risk misunderstanding, it risks alienating their followers, brands, and even friends. So when they hesitate to call themselves feminists, it's not a lack of belief. Instead, I argue that it's about navigating a landscape where visibility comes with risk, and where some labels do indeed carry more baggage than power. So where does that leave us with body positivity in Singapore, especially through influencers? So what I found here is that body positivity here is grounded more in personal empowerment and community care than overt activism. So their work does offer limited structural critique, but that doesn't mean it lacks power. I would say that it still makes space for different stories, different bodies, and different ways of being seen. And it exists in the liminal space that is not quite fully radical, but not quite co-opted either. But I don't see this liminality as a flaw. After all, resistance often takes place in the very systems it seeks to challenge, and this resistance is shaped by the language, tools, and constraints of that system. So in the same way, body positivity in Singapore works within the limits, and that doesn't mean it stops here. So in conclusion, I argue that we shouldn't judge this movement by how loud or confrontational it is here, especially in Singapore. Instead, we should understand it on its own terms. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take on any more questions that you have in the Q&A function. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cindy. This is a wonderful, well-timed presentation, and thank you for being our first presenter. Now we're moving on to our second presenter, Anabelle. If you're here, could you please come to the floor and share your screen? Thank you.
Good evening. It's midnight here in the eastern coast of Canada. And the title of our talk is Breaking the Influencer Activist Binary. And I am co-authoring or co-presenting, although they're not going to be presenting today, with Jovi Galit and Sheila Diamse. So the work that we're going to share is not based on research about other people, but about our own experiences as people who are navigating digital activism. But before I start, I'd like to do a land reflection. So some Indigenous nations refer to the land now called Canada and the broader continent of North America as Turtle Island, a name from stories passed down through generations, which carry deep knowledge about how to live with the land and care for each other. We are in Takaronto, or colonially known as Toronto, and Oron Wakon, colonially known as Hamilton, which is still home to Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis people. Miigwech, Nyawe, merci, and thank you to the people on whose territory we're able to live and thrive. Even though many of us have histories of migration and struggle, we're living on lands taken from Indigenous peoples. That makes it our responsibility to learn, show respect, and take action to support Indigenous rights and leadership. So I mentioned earlier that three of us are writing this presentation and also the paper that will follow. So I am Anabelle RAGSAG. I am a PhD candidate at McMaster University, and I'm working on people policy and I'm always forgetting people and tech of social assistance. And I'm also a co-founder of Filipinas of Hamont. The other co-author for this particular presentation is Jovi Galit. She's an artist, a social entrepreneur, a community organizer, and is a co-founder of Pinay Collection. Sheila Diamse is a multimedia content creator at Rogers Sports and Media. She's a former international student ambassador of George Brown College here in Canada as an international student. So that's about us. We want to also share what is the state of influencers in Turtle Island, or as I mentioned a while ago, it's a term most Indigenous people refer to Canada. So Canada's creator economy and their influence is growing, according to my et al. In 2022, but infrastructures are still unequal. So earlier studies say that those with social media influence in Canada, although a bit dated in 2014, are mostly traditional political elite, like media outlets, journalists, politicians. And meanwhile, racialized, queer, trans, and disabled creators are disproportionately experiencing algorithmic erasure, platform precarity, cultural invisibility, and are pressured into aesthetic norms to perform diversity. So knowing that, we want to ground our work in third world feminist thought, and specifically with a Filipino-American scholar, Neferti Tadyar, whose work is around, or at least one of her works is around remaindered life. And in the remaindered life, she's talking about racialized and feminized labor outside of capital's concern, yet persistently generative. So we understand that Tadyar doesn't study influencers, she doesn't study digital life, but she studies how racialized people's lives are made into flexible, extractable resources by empire, capital, and technology. So earlier, like when we were talking about the attention economy, this is precisely what Tadyar is talking about and critiquing as well. We're extending, or at least we're trying to extend her framework to explain what's happening to racialized creators on digital platforms. So we're using the term, or we're trying to use the term platform organizers to refer to ourselves, not as romantic heroes nor purely resistant figures. Our digital labor, the three of us, our digital labor is entangled, shaped by survival needs, community commitments, platform pressures, and the ongoing work of making lives livable within racialized digital economies. So our work will be presenting three cases, and these cases are based on our experiences creating content and at the same time mobilizing our communities. But because we have limited time, I will focus this presentation on two cases. The first would be Pinay Collection, which is founded by Jovi Galit, one of my co-authors here. So Pinay Collection is a social entrepreneurship that she started. And when we were meeting, like, what are the things that we want to tell? What are the things that we want to tell in this symposium? And the similarities that we found among ourselves are three: naming what we're doing, the digital strategies that we use, and what are the impact that we have beyond the feed. So Jovi's Pinay Collection here is saying that she sees her work and she sees social media as a site of decolonial feminist resistance. And the digital strategies that she has been using are amplifying people-centered stories from the Philippines and its diaspora, foster transnational solidarities and collective care through digital mutual aid and calls to action, use digital marketing and social entrepreneurship to support decolonial political education and influence. And the impact of Pinay Collection beyond the feed is something that I have seen over the years. So just a disclosure, it's our first time to work together. I haven't worked with Jovi before, but I have been following Pinay Collection for a while, and I have also purchased some items from her merchandise. And what I love and the reason why I connected with Jovi is that I have seen how the social entrepreneurship that she started is not only about business, it's not only about creating followers, it's not only about being an influencer, but she ties everything that she's working for transnational solidarities and supporting community organizations, collective organizations in the Philippines. So she has raised over 44,000 Canadian dollars for grassroots organizations. She mobilized thousands around intersectional calls to action. For example, in Palestine, when it was so hard to organize around that in Canada, when there's so much silencing and repression, even if it's a relatively free country. And Jovi has been at the forefront of that. She cultivated in-person spaces for political education. And here, I just wanted to articulate what she has shown in this slide, where she said that it's really important to understand the platforms that she's using and the role of urgency and critical research in their work. So for example, she generated over 4,156 Canadian dollars in donations for communities impacted by Typhoon Karina by, again, tying her social enterprise model with transnational solidarity. She helped increase public awareness of the systemic neglect and corporate-driven environmental harm experienced by Filipinos during calamities. And what Jovi is doing in Canada, in the Canadian influencer or in the Canadian digital activism sphere, at least this is from my observation, is that it's not very common for community organizers to be tying their work back to the Philippines. Most of the organizing happens within communities here. There's nothing wrong with either, but I feel that it's really powerful that Jovi is doing this as part of her decolonial feminist orientation. This still relates to some of the work that Jovi is doing. So she's involved, or she's connected with a lot of work on Filipino political prisoners and their legal defense campaigns. She helped collect over 100 letters of solidarity from community members. If you see this, you might wonder that this is her business model, but this is not. But she ties her business model with all of this solidarity work with, like, for example, Filipino political prisoners in the Philippines, or typhoon and emergency assistance in the country. So she mobilized hundreds across the Filipino diaspora in the Philippines in the campaign for the release of political prisoners. I will try to move on because I think it's 10 minutes. The next case is Sheila Diams's Pinoy GBC. So GBC stands for George Brown College. So when she moved to Canada as an international student during the pandemic, she was appointed as a paid student ambassador. And part of her role is to document her lived experiences online to inform and guide and as well as inspire newcomers, especially international students in Canada. And she looks at that work as political work. So again, looking at the commonalities among the three of us as we analyzed our cases, our own experiences of organizing and digital, our digital lives, her digital strategies includes creating informative social media posts. She collaborated with Philippine-based marketers for live streams and Q&A sessions. She opened up about her own struggles on TV and digital interviews. So the impact that she had beyond the feed is she realized that she has owned the narrative of the political, socio-economic consequences of the pandemic, especially on the lives of international students. So she helped counter misinformation by fact-checking immigration policies shared online, and also assisted in community building and in networking, and represented immigrant issues in mainstream media. So I really like how Sheila describes the work that she's doing, from making the headlines to becoming the headlines. So she wanted to start the story of her move to Canada as connected to her own story back in the Philippines. She was an executive producer for the largest TV network in the Philippines, but it was shut down due to political repression during the Duterte presidency. So they started, ABS-CBN was shut down, they started laying off workers, and unfortunately, she was one of those laid off. So she said that from retrenchment, she moved to reinvention. So she shared her truths about migration. And in the pictures here, you will see the many coverage of her own experiences in the media here in Canada. And I think, yeah, she moved from being in the newsroom to having news feeds. So she turned her struggles into digital stories. So as you can see in the pictures here, from being an executive producer, she had difficulty finding job in the first few months, and she had to settle for what many call a survival jobs, but at the same time doing digital stories on the side. So what we wanted to, based on this two, out of the three cases, we will write the third, which is my own experience with Filipinas of Hamont. But what we have found out is that marginalized creators, including Southeast Asians in Canada, like Filipinos, often navigate both influence and activism, and sometimes intentionally, sometimes as a condition of survival. So the activist influencer binary can obscure this complexity, reducing lived strategies of community building and self-preservation to simplified narratives of heroism or commodification. So I will be jumping to the conclusion. What we wanted to say overall here is influence is not just a brand, it is a battleground, like many of the examples that we have seen or we have shared. And who gets to be recognized as influencer are one of the things that we have observed in our own experiences is that being an influencer is not just those who monetize, but also those who mobilize. And we refuse the purity of activism or the trivialization of the influencer. We want to say that we are grounded in solidarity and not in spectacle. And with that, I on time. Maraming salamat.
Thank you so much, Anabelle. It's an honor to hear about your and your colleagues' experiences. Okay, now we will hear from Natty.
Well, I'm just gonna start now. Good morning from the UK. I'm Chanapang, Natty Pongpiboonkiat, and I recently finished my PhD from School of Media and Communication, University of Leeds. And my thesis explored the mediated construction of military identities of Thai military women and their self-representation on social media. But this paper expands from my thesis, exploring a critical question at the intersection of gender, militarism, and social media. And it is a very interesting topic for me, at least, given the prevalent use of social media among military personnel in Thailand and beyond. This means that social media has become such a significant element of military personnel's integration and everyday life. However, this phenomenon is rather intricate for military women who have to navigate complicated relationships with the military while simultaneously looking for comfort, relevance, visibility in order to establish a sense of belonging. So what inspires me to write this paper, apart from doing the thesis in the same kind of area? I'm going to talk about that in my research background. So the first thing is my own feminist questioning, taking the same energy from Cynthia Ello's feminist curiosity by paying close attention to the impact of militarism and militarization on women's everyday lives, including that of military women and women in the militarized settings. Studying the relationships between military and gender also gives us a clear picture of what it means to be a man and a woman, because the military, as deeply gendered institutions, often produces, reproduces, preserves, and perpetuates militarized masculine ideals within and outside the military. And therefore, the constructions of gender within the military have much wider resonance, profoundly influencing societal understandings of gender itself. And the constructions of gender also define militarism, how military and masculinity go hand in hand in sustaining patriarchy. And this can be observed through soldering activities such as military drill and operations, or discourse of protection, violence, and patriotism, and gender ideology itself. For example, hypermasculinity is often seen as strength and or superiority. And with the rise of social media used by the military itself and service members, alongside platformized or digital militarism, the study of military content creators and influencers on social media has become increasingly vital because it shifts traditional notions of what it means to work for the military, what it means, what the soldier means in public recognition. And it complicates the line between collective and individual identities and the military's hierarchy and service members' personal accounts. And it serves as a site of gender performativity, where we can observe how militarized gender plays out in public eyes. So the context of Thailand. In Thailand, women have served in the armed forces since 1940, but predominantly in supporting roles. As of 2020, women make up just 8.7% or around 22,103 active military women serving in different kind of units and departments. Despite this presence, media representations, such as what we see in news coverage or melodramas of Thai military women, remain marginalized and highly gendered, often focusing on their sweetness, beauty, youthfulness, and using terms like nang fa or angel and dok mai or flower when referred to them. And I also kind of identify these kind of themes in my own thesis as well, but we don't have time to talk about that. That's okay. The context raises two central questions for my research and specifically in this paper. The first question is, how do Thai military women influencers construct and negotiate gendered identities on social media? And the second question is, does the online presence suggest or even enhance female liberation, or does it simply reinforce militarized or normative gender norms? And to address these questions, I draw on feminist scholarship in international relations and critical military studies, or I would just say IR and CMS. Prior mentioned scholars such as Cynthia Illo, Herbert, Feynman, and Woodward and Duncanson argue that the military is not just a masculine institution, but it actively produces, reproduces, perpetuates, and reinforces gendered characteristics that can transcend both offline and online settings, both within and outside of the military. In Thailand, this is further complicated by the military's political power and its influence on national gender ideology. And this means that the military has opportunities to permeate civilians' life and activities, imposing militaristic ideas and ideals using their power. I also use feminist critical discourse analysis, or FCDA, to analyze the data following FACLAV's three-dimensional CDA, but incorporates multimodal analysis to look at visuals, language, gestures, and sound. So this FCDA is further enriched by my own positionality as a former Thai military woman to deeply and carefully examine gendered elements that may not always be explicit and straightforward, necessitating a familiarity with the military hierarchy and culture. with TikTok as a site where military women construct and perform their gendered identities. I focus on 5 Thai military women influencers, each with a significant number of followers and more than 1 million likes. So the first one is like on the far left. The second one is Ploy Hungry or Nong Ploy. The third one is Luk Pat or Pat Supanan. The fourth one is Papa Ta Grom or Blah. And the fifth one is Fong Bia. So they all use their own kind of nickname in their TikTok accounts. Going through their popular content, it can be divided into 5 themes, including the first theme, military lifestyle. For example, get ready with me, a day in a life as a military woman, conveying that kind of routine and ordinary life in the military. And this kind of linked to the second theme, where if they're married to or dating military partners, they would just share that kind of content on their TikTok account as well, doing couple stuff together. The third theme is the content about personal reflections on recruitment. Sometimes they would give their own kind of advice on how to do like the military kind of like enlisting exam or procedures to get through to the final round of military enlistment. And the fourth theme is aesthetic content, blending military imagery with feminine characteristics. So it's pure like aesthetics kind of content. And the fifth theme is military representative and endorsers, where they use their own TikTok account for military official content. So they would just would perform as military presenter, showing or sharing or talking about like the whole event, like military event or activity, as if they represent the military. Using FCDA, I identified 3 themes of findings actually for this paper. So the first finding suggests that the military's gendered characteristics are fundamental to how these women construct their social media identities. Even when they perform masculine military tasks, such as carrying rifles or leading drills, they do so with soft facial expressions, gentle gestures, and feminine appearance and language, or add a bit of unseriousness to it to tone down that kind of violence that usually militarism would convey. And this blending of militarized and feminine traits is a clear example of what I call militarized femininities. And these 2 videos exemplify militarized femininities, where both Lukpat and Blah appear in full military gear and action, yet they maintain a feminine appearance through the use of visual aesthetics and soft facial expressions. And the music selections also contrast their soldiering appearance and actions, making the content even less serious. So I think I might be able to share one of this just in case we run out of time. And this is like from Lukpat. Okay. Second, why TikTok offers these women a platform for self-representation and alternative discourse. Their identities remain conditioned by the military's gender norms, policies, and hierarchy. I call this constrained liberation. It is a liberation in a way because these women break the norm by joining the military, which is a traditional male region, often seen as a sign of modernity and the emergence of new women, gender equality. Nonetheless, drawing on Cynthia Ello's work, military women's lives in deeply militarized settings are explicitly shaped by the military, and there is such a limited room for women to resist the norms and negotiate for power. In fact, these women must balance their individuality with the need to conform to military hierarchy and secure their professional standing. It is a particularly challenging situation given the obscure nature of the military institution on top of the gender norm, hierarchy, and policies. It is further complicated when their lives are deeply militarized through familial tie. For example, 3 out of 5 influencers are married to military men or come from military families, and thus their identity and self-representations are shaped by not only by personal agency, but by institutional and familial expectations. The final theme, TikTok enhances visibility and relevance of women in the military. Given an inherent lack of public recognition and marginalization of women in the military, this visibility is significant to their military identity construction and a sense of self and belonging. Furthermore, the TikTok content presents an attempt to redefine traditional representation of Thai military women by having diverse roles and responsibilities and having personality to it, not just a flat image seen in the media. Although audience responses are not a focus of this paper, I observed strong engagement in the comment section where TikTok users participate in the influencers' content, sharing thoughts about them, sharing likeness toward this type of content. And so this is really good for the military itself because like they can maintain this kind of relevance and popularity through military women's influencers account. At the same time, content reflecting normative gender norms like traditional wifehood, content or trad wife also receive positive responses, emphasizing what Thai audience want to see or enjoy seeing or expect to see from military women influencers account. Well, so I'm going to wrap up now. And I think the key thing and the key finding from this paper is that Thai military women influencers account suggest that they have to navigate a complex terrain because their social media presence both challenges and upholds militarized gender norms. And the presence of military women on social media is a double-edged sword, saying that it increases visibility and offers some agency, but this agency is still constrained, where it must align with institutional expectations and often perpetuates the very gendered hierarchies it might seek to challenge. Okay, that's my bibliography, and that is a wrap. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Natty. Congratulations on completing your PhD.
Thank you.
And also please join me to thank Cindy and Anabelle for the first panel. Now we will just transit straight to the second panel, which will be moderated by Professor Crystal Aberdeen.